is a very special day. The breeze took the clouds all away. It swept the sky like a broom and got ready for a very special day. This is a very special time. Show me a hill I can climb. Give me a mountain to move, and I'll prove that it's a very special day. I woke up early this morning with gloom on my head. Had a big feeling to climb back in bed. Then I looked in the mirror and somebody said, wake up, wake up. It's time for you to lose the blues, and this is a very special treat. Tell it to everyone you meet, that life is all for living and love is all for giving. So this is a very special day. Tell it to everyone along the way that this is a very special day. Up early this morning with gloom on my head. Had a big feeling to climb back in bed. Then I looked in the mirror and somebody said, wake up, wake up. It's time for you to lose the blues, and this is a very special treat. Tell it to everyone you meet, that life is all for living and love is all for giving. So this is a very special day. Tell it to everyone along the way that this is a very special day.
And we are going to start our morning off. It's a finally fantastic, maybe just a little Freaky Friday. That means my partner in crime, my co-host this morning, Holly Thompson. Good morning, Holly.
Good morning.
From Salem Crossing. And we do have our own Dr. David West Reynolds with us. And good morning. And can I just call you David?
You may.
Awesome. And we're going to find out some great things that he's got going on. But Holly, let's thank our sponsors this morning.
We'd like to thank Meadowview Healthcare, Walmart, Salem Crossing, Hoosier Uplands, Americans for Prosperity, Mama Roses, Fox Lee Wealth Management, Dr. Black's Eye Associates, Dr. Mindy Gunn, Marshall Monuments, and McAllister Landing. Thank you so much, sponsors.
All right, thank you to our great sponsors. Also, tonight we do have a basketball action. Eastern Musketeers will be at West Washington, 7:30 start for that on WSLM, and Miami, Ohio at IU. And that will be at 7:30. So exciting action for basketball here on WSLM. And of course, want to remind everybody we've got the beautiful Christmas music going, and so please enjoy that. And tomorrow morning is Shop with the Cop. It's a wonderful program brought to us here in our community, and that'll be on Saturday morning. So if you hear all the sirens and going on, that's where the police officers take the children to go shopping for Christmas. It's a wonderful program. And then on Sunday will be Cram the Cruiser. The police officer will have their vehicles set up at Walmart and JC, and all the groceries. I think they have had over, so far, 19,000 pounds of food.
That is awesome.
Yeah, so that's quite an accomplishment. So it's called Cram the Cruiser. So anyway, so that'll be on Sunday from 10 to 2. So exciting weekend plans for sure. All right, so let's jump in and find out. And first of all, tell us about yourself, David. And you're from New Albany?
Yes, I am.
Right here, hometown guy.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. What a pride of Indiana here. Look at you. So let's talk a little about yourself and your growing up, and tell us your story.
So I grew up in New Albany and Jeffersonville, and my father was an architect. And that got me interested in plans and diagrams, but the main thing was the fossil beds in Jeffersonville. Have you guys been there?
Oh,
Falls
yes.
of the Ohio?
Yes.
So my mom was a cool mom. We didn't have money growing up, so she would come up with stuff we could do that was free. And so the falls back then was kind of a dangerous area, or at least it seemed that way. Like people would say, you shouldn't take your kid down there.
Yeah.
And, it was just dodgy. It wasn't dangerous, but it, felt a little edgy. And she would take me down there and we'd look at the rocks, and just her whole attitude was the world is full of things to discover. And look at the rocks, and she'd pick them up. It's like her attitude was just like, even the rocks have a story to tell. So she'd pick up the rock and say, so what do you think this is? And it looks like fish skin. It's like, so did the fish turn into a rock? And how does this happen? And does it look like elephant skin? And so we didn't know. And I said, well, what is it? How are these things made? And she said, well, those are great questions. I don't know, but let's go to the library. Let's go to the museum and ask. And so lucky for me, we had great librarians at the New Albany Library. And Jan Applegate and Ruth Houghton, they welcomed me and treated me like I had brilliant questions, even though I'm this tiny little person. And they helped me find books that would say, well, these are fossils. And it looks like fish skin, but it's actually coral, because that's what grew around here. And this whole fossils, all in the Falls of the Ohio, that was a huge coral reef. And so that opened my mind to paleontology. So my mom gave me that attitude that the world is full of adventure. And you don't need resources, you need an attitude. You need the spirit of adventure, and then you can turn your backyard into anything, as long as you're looking for stories. That was the other thing. For her, it was about what can we find that will lead us to discovery. And it wasn't find this and take it home and we've got it on the shelf. It was, we learned something. We learned a good story, or we found something out about how the world works. So all that came from her teaching me, and going into areas that other people would say, you shouldn't do that, but she would take me little by little. I'd want to climb the tree. Well, that's dangerous. Why don't you climb this fallen tree, practice, and then go a little farther, and then go a little farther. And so she taught me about adventure, that you can do this responsibly if you understand your limits, go little by little. I could do things that other people thought were dangerous, but eventually I'm doing it with complete confidence, and I know what's safe for me. Right. So that was a great foundation. And then Raiders of the Lost Ark comes along in 1981, and Cinema 4 and Showcase Cinemas. Did you ever guys go to
Cinemas? Yes.
Those were yes, that's our stomping grounds. Absolutely. Yes. That's what we had, right?
That was the place to see a big movie. Cinema 4 was the big one.
Yeah.
And that's where I saw Raiders. And
what if we were sitting there at the same time? You know what I mean? I don't know.
Could have been. Could have been.
This is so cool. So you go and you get your ticket, and which nobody had any idea. This was so like nothing else, right?
A friend of mine, David Zoller from school, called and he said, hey, did you see the people that made Star Wars have come out with this new movie? And I said, what? I didn't hear about that. I remember opening up the newspaper in my living room. Remember newspapers, kids? and the ad had some guy, and it said, the ultimate hero in the ultimate adventure. And I thought, well, that's taking in a lot of territory. That sounds pretty arrogant. I don't know about this. And he said, well, I don't know. I think it could be really good. So I had no idea what to expect. Nothing. And I just went in there, and it was just delightful from the first frame. It was wonderful, just packed with entertainment and that spirit of adventure. Like, yes, Raiders of the Lost Ark connected me with archaeology, but even more, it was that, what I loved was that spirit of adventure. It was not just the way Indiana Jones treated the world, it was the way Steven Spielberg and George Lucas gave us a world full of discovery and over-the-top adventure. And so archaeology was a vehicle to that end, but it was the adventure that I loved the best. But Raiders was what taught me, I loved Star Wars. That had been huge for me. But Star Wars, how do I go there? How can I be in that world? But Raiders of the Lost Ark said, oh, there's great adventures to have right here. And so I became enamored of the 1930s and started thinking about archaeology. So that was my background. And then how does an archaeologist, so I ended up going into archaeology. I get a degree at IU, and then I went and got my PhD at the University of Michigan. But I'd always remembered my love of Star Wars and my interest in applying things in ways that other people didn't. So I wanted to go to the Star Wars universe. We can't. It's another planet, right? But they used to give trading cards. Do you remember these at the convenience stores? They were like baseball cards,
Yeah.
but they had movie
Yeah.
pictures.
Yeah.
And well, that for me was the ancient internet. That's how, if you loved a movie, you want to see pictures from it, you can't go to the internet. You've got to go and buy those little trading cards, and you
Right.
trade them with your friends. Did you get Luke Skywalker? Did you get Darth Vader?
Yeah.
Oh, I got a sticker of Princess Leia. So those cards, I used to just study those. And I loved that the world of Star Wars that I'd seen on screen was so believable. That's what really connected with me, because it's a fantasy world, and yet everything was so convincing. So that's what, like, as an archaeologist, as a person with that mindset, I'm looking really closely at things. And usually, any movie, you see the edges, you see the artifice, the parts where they're just making this up. It's costumes and props, it's not the real thing. Star Wars felt real to my little kid self.
Oh, yeah.
And it was because they had approached it so differently, and they made everything look used and lived in a way that nobody had ever seen in science fiction before.
Right.
So I'm finishing my PhD at the University of Michigan, and I'm ahead of schedule. I'm finishing months early, and I think, well, I've got a little time to myself, and the dissertation I did didn't take me out into the field. And I wanted to feel like a field archaeologist. I was going to get the PhD, but that's not what I really want. I want to feel like I'm an archaeologist.
Yes.
And my project wanted to do that. So everyone really liked my dissertation, but it wasn't giving me that satisfaction of I've proven myself.
Yeah.
I'm looking at those Star Wars cards, and I read on the back of them, this was filmed in a country called Tunisia. I didn't know Tunisia from Mars when I was a little kid, but now I'm a graduate student in archaeology. I'd worked in North Africa. I'd dug in Egypt. I'd guided tours on the Nile. I'd operated in the Arab world, in the deserts, and I thought, I'm going to go to Tunisia and see if I can find the locations where Star Wars was filmed. And that way I can go to another planet. So everybody said, you're going to do what? That's just crazy. Nobody does that. Besides, how could you ever find these things? I said, well, I'll call Lucasfilm. So I called Lucasfilm. I said, hey, I'm an archaeologist. I want to go visit these locations. Can you give me some guidance to where those places were? And they were very nice. This was back in the 90s, before the internet. Everybody was different and accessible, because you didn't get crazy people always trying to waste your time.
Right.
So they could answer the phone. And I could just talk to them, and they could say, oh, you want to talk to the archives folks? Let's connect you with the library or whoever. And they'd say, oh, well, that sounds interesting. We'd love to help you. And they looked, but they came back and said, there are no records. We don't have any records of all those wilderness locations where they shot the films. So we can't help you. And I said, really? And I said, well, maybe we could connect you with the production manager who scouted those locations. He might remember something. So they said, well, we'll give you his address and you can write to him. I thought I'd never hear back. The phone rings. It's Robert Watts, the production manager from Star Wars, who scouted the locations. And he's working on a movie, but he calls me from the set and says, oh, David, you want to go see the locations in Tunisia? It's wonderful. But, I've made so many movies in the last 20 years. All the wilderness locations blend together, so I'm not sure if I can see Star Wars. And he couldn't remember much. But he finally got down to Luke Skywalker's homestead, right? It's out on the salt flat, in the middle of nowhere, nothing. Yeah, I remember that. He said, well, I remember as we got up each morning from the hotel and went out to the site, that was on the left. And I'm writing, and I'm saying, yeah, on the left, on the left where? And he's like, well, out on the road towards Algeria, like that direction. But anyway, good luck. I can't wait to hear what you find.
Oh, wow.
So I was going to get a test. I mean, this is like going to a country the size of Florida.
Yeah.
And I've got my bubblegum cards.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, can you show me this rock? And I went to that country, and I spent 6 weeks in the desert with a dinosaur hunter friend of mine. And we found every one of the locations.
Oh, wow.
I had to use different techniques for different things. I'm looking for architecture here. I'm looking for different kinds of geological strata and how the rocks are put together, because that narrows down what parts of the country I have to search. But it still took 6 weeks. So finding the locations was fantastic. What I didn't expect was to find props abandoned in the sand from Star Wars for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Oh my.
Because it's an Arab country where Star Wars meant nothing. So the rest of the world, Star Wars is a big deal. They don't think anything of it. So I found the city they had filmed as Mos Eisley Spaceport. And I found the ruins of this city, which was built in traditional architecture. And I find that the traditional architecture of Tunisia was so otherworldly that when they came to shoot Star Wars, they said, we can just use this. So we'll take these buildings, and we'll just add a few like technological bits. We'll stick an antenna on it here and some gizmos there. But then basically we've got our spaceport, and it was 90% just the town that was already there, because it was this weird place with domes and buttresses, just really interesting architecture. And the producers were so clever to figure out that if we shoot here, we don't have to build all of this ourselves. So it saved them money, because the first Star Wars movie was shot on a shoestring. We think of Star Wars as billion-dollar production kind of thing now, and back then George was having to stretch every dollar. So it was brilliant that they came up with how we could stretch this and shoot in a place that already looked otherworldly. Well, I get there, and they're busy tearing down that architecture as fast as they can because it's old-fashioned. We want our architecture to look like everybody else in the world. Look at our brand new concrete block buildings. They're so boring. They could be any place. And they're tearing down Star Wars.
Oh my.
But there's still a little bit of it. When I get there, I found a cantina. This is where Luke Skywalker meets Han Solo, and this is the exterior of that place. I'm so happy. And I'm looking around in the back, and there's a pile of junk, and there's the door to the cantina. The door to the cantina. You see square on in the movie, there's 3 drunk Jawas sacked out in front of the door that Luke Skywalker walks past when he goes into an open door. And that door's still there. It's being used as the door of a chicken coop.
No.
No.
The guy has built it into his chicken coop.
Oh wow.
And I'm saying, I can't believe this. This is like, they won an Oscar for the set decoration of Star Wars, and it's the chicken coop door. And so I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to say to, like, dude, I really like your chicken coop door. How much you want for that?
Yeah.
And I eventually bought it from him and shipped it home, and it's now the largest surviving piece of a Star Wars set.
Oh, it's fun.
And it's on display in the world's largest Star Wars museum in California.
So you shared it. You didn't just keep it.
I-
Oh wow, look at you.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
tough.
Yeah.
I mean, that wouldn't have been, part of your home decorations. You know what I mean? Wow.
That's what everyone expected.
Well-
that I would just, hey, hang it on the wall, right?
I mean-
but I thought no one will see it.
I know. This is so. Oh wow.
Now everybody gets to see it, and so it's a highlight on the tour. Steve Sansweet's Rancho Obi-Wan Museum out in California, and it's the Guinness Book of World Records certified largest Star Wars collection in the world.
Oh,
And he's got my door on display.
that is incredible.
So okay, I know there's more, and I want to continue on. So I do not want to interrupt you, but there's so many things here. Okay, so when you find this door, like, are you making a call to someone like, oh my goodness, you're not going to believe this, or like, how quick did you get to George Lucas? I found the door. I mean, and then what was his, like, what? Where did all this?
Great questions, Becky.
conversation?
So I get through with my expedition in the desert. It's been very difficult. 6 brutal weeks.
But
I'm
I
getting
don't think
up at
6
dawn.
weeks seems like a long time to me. I mean, I know you're like, it's like, like.
But in the desert, it could be.
Well, yeah, probably, maybe that is true. But I'm thinking in the grand scope of life, 6 weeks is not that long. You really hustle. Do you feel that
Yes,
way? I mean,
yes, and then thank you for seeing it that way. Other people think you took 6 weeks, and it's like, it's a country, man.
no.
So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Okay, so we find the door, and who was the first person you call?
So, so you got to remember, over 6 weeks, most days I'm finding nothing.
Okay.
I'm out in the desert, in the dunes, so I want to find the sand dune places where R2-D2 and C-3PO have crashed in the escape pod, and they're walking around in the desert. I want to find that exact spot. But there's dozens of dune fields in Tunisia. It's the edge of the Sahara Desert where there's dunes to the horizon. I'm searching one dune field after another. We go as far as Land Rovers will take me, and they can't go any farther, so I learned to ride a camel.
Oh.
And when we're just, day after day, we're finding nothing. And it feels like this is a crazy thing to be doing. You should just call it done. This is good enough. It's sand dunes. It looks pretty much the same.
Yeah.
But we stuck with it.
Love that.
And I eventually find in the open Sahara, mind you, the dinosaur bones that C-3PO had walked past in one scene of Star Wars. 20 years later, they've been blown halfway to Egypt by sandstorms, and a few of them are still there waiting for me. So that was the culmination of the trip. I come home, and all I'd wanted to do was to be there, was to just be in that world and be able to see past the edges of the screen, in the movie screen, because I'd watched the movie so carefully, and I always wanted to know what's just a little beyond the edge. What is that world like? I want to be in that world. And I'd had that experience. And the cool thing was that it didn't kill the fantasy for me.
Right.
Even though I'm at the place where, Ben Kenobi and Luke Skywalker, where Ben Kenobi rescues him, it didn't feel like, well, here's where Alec Guinness did a dialogue scene with Mark Hamill. For me, it still felt like it's the Junland Waste. There could be sand people. So I loved that it didn't kill that for me. And so I thought, well, you're an archaeologist. You go into the field. You've conducted an expedition. You've made findings. You publish that. But my findings are on planet Tatooine. The usual journals are not going to want this. Where am I going to publish this? And I found out, well, there's a magazine called Star Wars Insider that's published by Lucasfilm. Maybe they'll want it. So I sent it to them. Now, as an archaeologist, when you send in your expedition report to a journal and the editor determines whether it's worthy of inclusion in our journal, they give you a call and let you know. And that was the only time I've had a journal editor call me and say, "Dude, that rules!" So Star Wars Insider, he was crazy. He said, "I can't believe this is just wild. I can't believe you did this." And he gave me the cover. So the cover was Return to Tatooine. And you got to remember, at this time, nobody had ever gone back and hunted down the locations where a movie was filmed. Yeah. Nobody ever had visited locations where a movie was shot just for fun or as tourism or as to be a fan. It was not done. Nobody did it. So nobody I ever talked to had ever heard of anybody who had done such a thing. But that got the cover story in the magazine.
That's wow.
So that whole tradition.
You made it when you're on the cover. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So the whole tradition of visiting movie locations started because of my trip to Tunisia. Now hundreds of thousands of people do this, but it all got started because of that trip. So I thought I was done.
And the Falls of the Ohio and the Spear of Adventure, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I felt like this is great. I've lived my Star Wars dream. Good for me, and now I can go off and be an archaeology professor. What I didn't count on was the fact that George Lucas was planning to make the Star Wars prequels. Well, they needed to go back to the original locations to shoot those. But when George calls his own archive, they say, well, we don't have that information.
But somebody does.
And George Lucas's producer, Rick McCallum, the guy who takes care of everything for George, he makes it happen so that George can just be in the middle and say, I'd like the story to be like this. I'd like things to look like that. Rick McCallum was the guy that would go and make it all happen. And so it was Rick that George said, would you go back to Tunisia and look at the original locations and find me some new ones? I'm going to need some slave quarters too. So Rick says, you bet, George. And then talks to the archives and finds out, what? We don't know? You got to be kidding. We don't know? And so he's trying to figure out, what am I going to do about this? He's a tough guy. He filmed Young Indiana Jones Chronicles in 35 countries.
Oh, wow.
He's an adventurer type, but still, how are you going to go into this country and with your bubblegum card of a picture of a rock and say, can you show me this rock? And no kidding, somebody from publishing says at Skywalker Ranch, Rick, weren't you talking about the Tunisia locations? Look, some kid went and found them all, and they put the magazine on his desk.
Oh.
And he said, you have got to be kidding.
This is so awesome.
Yeah.
This is coming full circle. This is like...
So that's when get the kid on the phone. So Rick McCallum calls and says, I can't believe you did this. This is wonderful. It's going to save us so much time. This is perfect. I'm going to fax you a map. Just mark some X's on it and fax it back, okay? Great. This is going to be wonderful. So I get the fax. And now I'm having to think. I just spent my last dollar on this. I didn't have money. I'm a graduate student.
Right.
I spent thousands of dollars on this that I didn't really have. knocked myself out for 6 weeks.
Sure, yeah.
And I'd never thought of it as something to do for commercial gain, but I'd worked pretty hard, and I knew actually it would have taken, a combination of my knowledge of Star Wars down to the last atom and my knowledge of archaeology. It would not have been easy for anyone else to find those things.
Sure.
And I was now first recognizing this information is valuable. So, what are you going to do about this? Are you going to give him the X's because George Lucas's right-hand man is calling you?
Yeah, sure.
Or are you going to say, I want something for this? And what I ended up deciding to do was I call Rick back and I say, look, you're such an important guy. Would hate to see you wasting your time. X's are so vague. It's a big country. You don't need a map, Rick. You need a guide. And there's a long pause. And it's in that long pause, that's when you're tested. That's when opportunity is testing. Because you want to fill in that pause and say, well, but of course I'll give you the X's if that's what you really want. That long pause was a watershed of my life. Am I going to stick with that? Or am I going to say something to fill it in? And I just let it stay silent.
Well played, well played.
And Rick finally says, so that's how it's going to be, is it? And I'm thinking, you idiot, you're blowing this. Lucasfilm's going to say, he was a jerk, he's trying to soak us for money. Get rid of this guy. But I just stuck and I said, yeah, that's how it's going to be. And he said, well, I hope you can get packed quick because you're going to need to be there next weekend. And I said, I'm an archaeologist, Rick. I'm always ready to go.
All I need is my toothbrush, ready to go. Yeah.
And we met in Tunisia, and I was their location scout for the next couple of weeks in the desert.
Wow.
So we get there, he finds out I'm an encyclopedia of Star Wars, and the short version of what happens there is just they end up offering me a job at Skywalker Ranch. And I said, I'm an archaeologist. You don't need an archaeologist at Skywalker Ranch. And he said, well, but we're about to launch a new series of movies, the Star Wars prequels. And we need someone who knows that world like you do. He said, you know things that George never knew. He's a director up at the top of this. He doesn't have time to know that's a two-back tether ring, or John Barry designed the Mos Eisley docking bays with blast deflector vents built in so that the way it was supposed to work. George doesn't know all that stuff.
Sure.
His art department did that. The prop people did that. You had time to study it from that standpoint. You know that universe down to the last little detail, and you know what the fans want. We need that. And they offered me a job, and I turned it down.
Oh, wait.
Because I just put 6 years into getting an archaeology PhD from the best program in the country. I can't go off to play in Hollywood just because that's fun. And so Rick, Rick knows how to get what needs to happening.
I'm sure.
So he says, well, just come out and visit. Just look the place over just so we can say thank you. And I go out and visit, and they put me up in the same suite where James Cameron stayed when he was working on the sound for Titanic. Like, that's the kind of treatment. It's this fabulous, beautiful place. George owns all the land to the horizon. It's not unlike the valley on the way to Salem.
Wow.
Is it New Providence was the original name of Borden? Is that right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, exactly.
So where you see the hills around you, it's not that different. It's just California scenery, but George owns it all. And instead of the top of the rock cabin up on the cliff, it's Skywalker Ranch. And George has built everything there and designed it all himself. And it's pretty cool. And what Rick finally says is, David, you're always telling me that you archaeologists need to understand how to share what you do better with the public. Because every time that you hear somebody say, I think space aliens built the pyramids, you always telling me that's archaeologists fail to do a good job of telling the truth in an interesting way. Because the truth about this is actually more interesting than space aliens, because it shows what human beings can do when we set our minds to it. It's not just we can do amazing things when the space aliens show up.
Yeah.
We can actually do amazing things when we cooperate around a shared vision. And that's relevant to you. Space aliens aren't relevant unless they come back.
Yeah.
But when you see in the pyramids a testament to this is what we can all do if we really decide we're going to do something impossible. We can work together and make it happen. That's what is really there. And that's a powerful story. And it's the archaeologist's fault. It's not the public's fault. It's the archaeologist's fault if we didn't share that story in a way that transmitted that inspiration and made them see, oh, the pyramid is a message from the past with meaning for me. And that means that at work, I can build a team. It's going to accomplish the thing I want to do. I can start the business that I have in my mind. I can put the team together and we can do this. The pyramid is relevant for you if someone has interpreted it for you in a way that opens its message.
That's awesome.
So Rick McCallum says, so David, when is the next time you think there's going to be a chance for a PhD to come and learn storytelling from George Lucas? And I thought, that's Rick McCallum. He got me.
Yeah.
So I said, okay. And that's how I ended up on staff at Lucasfilm at Skywalker Ranch.
Wow.
So how many years were you there?
I was only there for a few years full-time at the ranch, but I was working freelance for them before and after. I stayed long enough to do all the things they needed me to do. I built the StarWars.com website. I was the creative consultant on trailers and MTV music videos and things like that. And then I pioneered 2 new series of reference books that treated the Star Wars universe like it was real, like I was an archaeologist in a foreign galaxy.
Wow.
And so I got to create backstory for the Star Wars universe, but all enriched by my understanding of archaeology, where you have to, when you come up with an idea, I think the Romans were doing this with this aqueduct, it has to fit with every other piece of evidence. So we're used to thinking that way. So everything that I created for the Star Wars universe, I was making it fit with all the other pieces. I knew what would be realistic and what wasn't, and I was constantly learning from George what makes a good story.
Right, sure. Now, okay, I want to get back on this. I'm trying not to jump in. 'Cause there's so many things. So, like you had an apartment, or what was your living conditions there at Skywalker Ranch? Are you allowed to tell?
Yes, I am now.
Okay.
Used to be we couldn't talk about a lot of the things, so I respect all those rules very carefully, but now I'm free to. Becky, they gave me an octagonal office. 5 of the walls were glass. It had a huge stone fireplace. Octagonal. And I shared this huge office, much bigger than the room we're in, with one guy, and he was Steve Sansweet, the former Wall Street bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal in Los Angeles, who had become the biggest Star Wars collector in the world. And Steve and I shared that office, but I had the desk that faced the door, and that's where I built StarWars.com and wrote my books, and that was a fabulous place. It was really incredible.
I can only imagine. And like the food, I mean, then they fed you, was it?
So they have.
I'm sorry, these are just like.
Sure, no, George created an oasis for creativity at Skywalker Ranch. He felt Hollywood was corrupt and they're just doing it to get the dollar. He wanted a place where people would create art because their soul wanted to create art.
Passion behind it.
Yeah, definitely.
And he built Skywalker Ranch as a protected sanctuary for that, where everything around you was beautiful and done to make your life better, to make you feel positive. And the place is trying to make you comfortable and happy and stimulated and inspired. That's what it's all about. So he took the money that Star Wars gave him and plowed it into creating something that was like Disneyland, except everything there was for real. It wasn't just for an image. And so instead of a business campus, it looked like a big house, a big Victorian house. And then there was a carriage house, and the Brook House is what I was in. And these were like the carriage house that had the licensing people, and the Brook House had the marketing people and me. And the main house was where George and Rick McCallum, and on the 3rd floor of the main house was the art department where they're cooking up the designs for the next Star Wars movie. It was just so beautiful. It was an amazing, wonderful place. And as great as it all was to look at, the community was the best part of all. I thought, I'm crazy to be going to Hollywood as an academic. I'll never fit in there. And that place became my family.
Oh, I can, yeah.
It was a place where you could be yourself. They just wanted to, hey, who are you? Discover yourself and share that with us. That's awesome, terrific. And they welcomed the fact that, well, I'm an archaeologist, but I know all this stuff about Star Wars, and yet I also like to work with NASA. And I had to hide different aspects of myself in those different other aspects of my life. Like, I'm at the University of Michigan, I can't tell them, well, I'm interested in Star Wars and space exploration. Zip! You've got to pretend like, no, I'm just the archaeologist, David West Reynolds. That's all I am. At Skywalker Ranch, if I was 6 different things, they loved it. And it was such a great community. I was a volunteer firefighter on the ranch fire department.
Wait, I love this. Wait, that is hilarious. That is so fun. Oh my
It was cheaper for George to start his own fire department than to get insurance for the fire.
Yeah.
So we were the fire department.
That's hilarious.
So,
did you guys do your own calendar?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, every crazy fun thing you can think of, that was Skywalker Ranch. I like the archives are a building next to the farm with the horses, and George had proposed to Linda Ronstadt. They used to ride horses there together, and so and that didn't work out, and yet he still had to drive to work every morning and pass Linda's horse. So that was kind of sad. But it's a place for dreams. So that's what Skywalker Ranch was like. And then the archives is where all the costumes and props and everything are kept. And the stuff that happens at Skywalker Ranch. One day, the head of PR, Jeannie Cole, rushes into my office and says, "David, how tall are you?" And I said, 5'11". And she says, "That'll do. Get down to the archives. You're late." And I have no idea what's going on. And I go down to the archives and find that I've just been chosen to be the next Boba Fett, which is a character from Star Wars. And so they fit me, and the costume fits like it was tailored. It fits just precisely down to the 1/4 inch. And they said, good, okay, now we've got Boba Fett. And from then on, for public appearances or magazine, book shoots, advertising, Boba Fett was David West Reynolds.
Get out.
And that was
my favorite too.
That's the kind of thing that I couldn't share for years. So it was a secret. But if you see Boba Fett against a white background, it's yours truly.
Oh my gosh, I'm like, this is like
so. Look for it now.
Yeah. So like when you were there, I mean, what a huge journey. I mean, and there you are to bring the two worlds together. So I have to ask, and I hope this is okay. Your mom, was she alive? Did she get to see all this in play?
Yes, she did.
Oh.
Yep.
Right.
Was she not just like?
Hey, so this went in crazy directions. So they started doing magazine articles and things, and that's led to where this summer, Becky, in New Albany, there was a museum exhibition about my career. And one of the things that the curators chose was a little diorama that I had made for my mom, with pipe cleaner figures of her and of me, and I'm holding her hand, and I've got a little rock in my pipe cleaner hand, and we're at the Falls of the Ohio. And the background says, "It was ours first."
Wait, I got chills. I could cry. Oh my goodness, your mom, I can't even imagine. I bet she's just, oh my goodness. To think about that. Now, did you get to bring her with you? Did she get to come visit?
She got to come visit.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, I can't even.
It does, gives me cold chills.
I mean, what a mother's dream.
Yeah.
And what a blessing to see this into play, and to see the worlds connect. David, you couldn't have gave her anything better.
Thank you, Mama.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. What a wonderful honor son you've been to her, and to carry on, and to take the knowledge that you were given, the seeds that were planted, and look at how they bloomed and kept blooming and are still blooming, right?
Well, thank you, but she couldn't have given me anything better. She did not have a good childhood, and she came to motherhood without much to work with, but she made that a virtue, because we'd pile into the back of the station wagon and be like, "Where are we going now?" "We're going to go to Clifty Falls." Wow, where's that?
But she
broke
like the
Victoria
chain.
Falls.
You said that she didn't have a good childhood, but she broke the chain.
Absolutely.
And changed it for you.
Absolutely. And you can take your pain in two different directions. You can take your pain and transmit it to the next person, or you can take your pain and say it stops with me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Go, Mom. Yeah, that's awesome.
Love
That
that
is so
story.
cool. Okay, so I want to go on more, but I need to find out. Okay, so if there's bones that you're finding in areas that you have camels, how are you pulling that stuff out? How did you get that stuff out? Okay.
So I'd ridden enough camels on enough days of finding nothing that I realized the Sahara Desert's a pretty big place, and you're not going to find this. Like, I tried to cut the search areas down, but that's what I did for the canyons or something. I'd cut the search areas down to where it was something reasonable, and then, okay, it may take a whole week, but we can search every one of these square miles. The desert was just too big. I finally realized I have to come up with something else. What can I do? So I learned some Berber. The Berbers are the local inhabitants of the Sahara. They're like the Native Americans who were here when the American settlers arrived. The Berbers were the people who were there when the Arabs arrived.
Whoa. Okay.
So I learned some Berber, and they're used to being treated really badly and treated like junk and shoved off to the corners. And so there, you have to speak Arabic or speak French, or I don't know what you're talking about. So I learned just enough Berber to be polite and to greet an elder and, just be courteous, and to ask them, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Have you ever seen anything like this? And enough of that, I went around asking around, and they were like, this guy speaks Berber? I mean, it was just a little bit, right? It's not, I didn't do anything magic, but I just showed them a little respect. And they went out of their way. They started talking to each other and telling them, like, he sounds kind of crazy. I don't know what he's really after. He's got these little cards, but he's a nice kid. Let's see if we can help him out. And it was finally this old chieftain. He's hearing me out, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And his little kid, he's got a little boy, like 7. And the boy says, the skeleton. And
The
I'm
little
like,
boy's
no
an adventurer
way.
too.
No way. And this
Oh,
boy's
gosh.
saying, I've seen a skeleton. And I'm thinking, it's got to be like a dead camel, right?
Yeah.
I can't get excited about this. But as soon as the kid's saying this, his father says, my son knows the way. We will go.
Wait, this is like a movie
Oh.
itself. Oh my goodness.
Oh.
And so it's like, okay. And like, I don't know if we will go means off we go for a couple of days
Yeah.
or what, but we're going that way.
Going.
So we troop into the dunes, up and down the dunes, and it's like
Are you
Lawrence
on
of
the camel
Arabia.
still?
But this is on foot.
On foot. Oh.
Now we're on foot.
Wow. Okay.
And we're trooping through the desert, and we get to this big dune. We're almost to the top, and he stops everybody. He says, you will go alone.
Wait, this is Indiana Jones. This is completely Indiana Jones. Oh my goodness. Okay.
And I go over the top of
This
this
is
dune,
like your
and-
dream come true.
and
You're
I
living
look
it.
down, and there, scattered down the back of the dune, are those bones from that bubblegum card that I looked at in Green Valley School when Mom put the cards of bubblegum cards in my lunch, in the little lunchbox. There are those bones. And they've been waiting all that time. And they're meaningless until I show up and say, hey, this is important to me. Can you help me? And the whole community networks until there's a 7-year-old kid and a chieftain who figure it out and take me there and make the experience wonderful for me by, you will go alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was incredible.
I mean, it's realistic, but do you realize how, like, that sounds like a movie? I mean, right?
I guess so, yeah.
I mean, probably in the time you didn't. I mean, you're
Not
probably
at
just
all,
wondering, am I going to make it out alive here,
Yes.
So did you use, like, metal detectors, or what do you do when you're, like, looking for stuff in the desert? What's your...
So in a case
Cool.
like that, it's fiberglass. There's nothing to detect, and it's so many square miles that the only way to find those things was going to be networking with the people who lived there and had been there for years, because you'll never search enough territory to track this down. It's so, you don't know how many miles it's been blown by the wind. Even if you could find the exact original location in the sand, which you can't because there's no landmarks, you wouldn't know where it might end up. It's only going to be the people who have the up-to-date knowledge of what's the situation. So it was dynamic. You've got to work with the community. And so your question's a great one. It depends what you're looking for. And so we have ground penetrating radar that you can, it's a big box and you can drag it over the ground and that can show you what's underground to a certain degree. Metal detectors are good for certain kinds of use, for certain kinds of things you're looking for to a certain depth, but you've got to constantly be ready to adjust your tool set for whatever the situation requires.
But you're limited on what you can carry or whatever the camel can pack. So you have degree of difficulties. There's always, it's not going to be.
There's always a way. I dug up the best dinosaur footprint ever found. Okay? The best dinosaur footprint ever found. A duck-billed dinosaur in Western Canada was in a swamp 70-something million years ago, and it had rained. The mud was like clay, and the dinosaur steps in the clay and steps out of it, and it's like this perfect footprint. You can see the scales on the bottom of its foot, the wrinkled, dry skin under its toenails. And that gets fossilized and turned all the way upside down, so a piece gets cast out of it to where it's now a model of that dinosaur's foot. I helped cut that out of a boulder with a rock saw, but we're in the middle of the wilderness in the Badlands. And it was just a question, like, it's coming out. So it's too heavy for us to carry. How are we going to do this? It's across a river. And so a farm girl ends up saying, I think my ATV could probably do that, and the river's not too deep. So she drives her ATV across the river, and we put this thing on the back, and the ATV lifts up because the weight's so heavy.
Oh,
so I have to hang on to the front of it. I'm facing backwards, standing on the bumper, and that holds the front down. And she's driving, and we plunge back into the river, and it's a question of, I mean, it's a river like Silver Creek or something, a little bigger than that.
Right.
And it's a question of, like, are they going to fall over, or, you know, or whatever. But, like, there's always a way. And if that hadn't worked, we would have called in the helicopter, which is $1,000 an hour.
Sure.
So you can do that if you have to, but you try to save the money. So there's always a way if you're determined.
I'm ready to see the movie of your life.
I'm
ready to see the movie.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Like it's an Indiana Jones all by itself.
Well, thank you. Well, then that leads us wonderfully to the fact that I am starting a documentary and about the archaeology of Indiana Jones. So, our Indiana Jones, that's what inspired me about archaeology, right? Well, at Skywalker Ranch in the archives, I have to work with the Star Wars props and costumes and models for my books. But all that time, sitting right next to them on the shelves are Indiana Jones things. The golden idol that Indy stole, the Grail diary.
The real props?
Yeah, the originals. The Grail diary that Indy's father keeps in the Last Crusade that leads them to the Holy Grail.
Oh, wow.
All the originals are there. And so the archives would have me come and work with them as a curator from time to time because I knew more about the objects than the people that were hired from outside, from the museum world. So they knew their museum side, but they didn't know the Hollywood side of things. So they would say, what is this? And I would say, oh, that's a jerba that was seen in Jabba's palace, but also outside the cantina. Okay, well, how do you spell that? So I would help identify things. Or they'd say, here's a box of bullwhips. There's like a dozen whips in here. Can you help us sort these out? And I would say, okay, this is the whip used on the circus train. This is so-and-so. And this one's got a wire core so that you can swing from it. So I would curate the whips. So then we get to the Grail diary, which is this fabulous, beautiful prop with all this incredible workmanship. And I said, so is there any record of all of this? Like, so what happens if there's a leak and the original is destroyed or it gets stolen or something? That would be bad. I said, so maybe we ought to photograph it all and document it. And the curator said, that's a great idea, let's do it. So I got the job of photographing every page of that Grail diary, and I loved it. It was really, the prop maker had done a wonderful job of making these pages seem full of mystery, and I thought, this is cool. This is a way to enrich the experience. And so I'd already been inspired by seeing that in the movie, but working with that Grail diary made me think that's the way to, it makes you pay attention to what you're living. Even if your sketch is a crummy sketch, it doesn't matter. It came out of you. You saw it. It came out of your hand. And then you see what you drew. Now that's a rich memory. It does not matter if you're not a great artist. It matters, did you try to engage with that experience as richly as you could? That's what's valuable. That's where the magic is. So I'm working with these Indiana Jones props, and the amazing thing was, I mean, I have a PhD in archaeology. I've worked with plenty of real ancient artifacts, and Hollywood things look fake by comparison. I can spot at an instant something from one of the mummy movies. It looks Egyptian, like in a way that Halloween stuff looks Egyptian. It's fun, but no archaeologist is ever going to be fooled by that sort of thing. And yet, in the archives at Skywalker Ranch, that stuff looked like it could have been in the British Museum. The hieroglyphic inscriptions were spelled correctly. Is that crazy?
Yeah, yeah.
So one of the things, I brought a replica for you. I wish we could show this to all of your audience. There's a thing in Raiders of the Lost Ark called the headpiece to the Staff of Ra. And it's a little gold disc that Indiana Jones uses in his treasure hunt for the Lost Ark of the Covenant. And I got to work with the original of that in the archives. And this is a bronze copy of that original.
Goodness.
Wow.
Oh,
And
that's absolutely beautiful.
Isn't it something?
Yeah, that's gorgeous.
So
That
you
is
s-
absolutely beautiful.
So you see the writing around the edge of that?
Yeah.
So that's what gets translated in the movie to help Indy find the Ark. And I'm looking at that, and that's a really funky kind of writing. Well, it's Middle Semitic script from about 850 BC. And it's the correct exact script for that time, where it's supposed to have happened in the movie story. And I'm even looking, and it's like, that's the Tetragrammaton. That is the 4-letter name of God in ancient Hebrew. And it's on this movie prop accurately. And I thought, this is far out.
Yeah.
Something strange happened with Raiders of the Lost Ark for them to go to that much work to get these things right. And all of the Egyptian artwork, like where Indiana Jones is in the map room or the Well of Souls, everything you see in the background is dead authentic. I got curious. How come this movie was so authentic when Hollywood ordinarily just says, yeah, we're going to have fun. We're going
Yeah.
to do some Egyptian mummy stuff.
Yeah,
There'll be some scarabs and Anubis, and we're just going to have a good time. Raiders had this tremendous respect for history. And I thought, this is interesting. And I started looking into it and finding things like that. And the more I looked into it, the more great research I found, and the more connections to real history. So it wasn't just the ancient history. It was like they had, for the Germans in the desert, digging up because we want to find the lost Ark of the Covenant. Every German vehicle that they're driving was authentically recreated replica of a real 1930s vehicle of the kind that the Wehrmacht would have been driving in North Africa. So it's the correct model. There's an Opel Blitz truck, and there's a Mercedes off-road vehicle, and the big truck that they have the action chase in, all that's custom made for the movie to look just like one of the originals, so good that it could end up in a museum afterward. They went, and these things are just in the background. They could have used a Jeep and nobody would know.
Well, I was going to say, on that, I mean, we would not have known that. I mean, a normal person would not have.
Ever.
Right.
But the result of getting all that little stuff right that nobody'd ever notice is that there's respect for history woven into that movie in a different way than we usually see. And so when you get a scene like Indiana Jones is in the map room, it's silent, they're in there in the morning, the sunlight is beaming through this skylight, and he's got to use this beam of light to try to find where the Ark is hidden. And Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford's performance, you can just see he's full of wonder as the sunlight beam slowly moves across the wall as the sun rises. And John Williams' music, and Steven Spielberg's direction, the way we're looking at Indy's face. And Norman Reynolds is the guy who did all of the designing. And all of those frescoes on the walls look exactly like the ones that I worked with in Egypt. And when you see Indy's feeling of discovery, that's exactly what it really feels like when you're an archaeologist and you're connecting with an ancient design that's transmitting meaning across thousands of years because it's still working. And because you're an archaeologist, you can see what that meaning is, and that feeling of discovery, of connection. I've never seen another movie that delivers that the way Raiders of the Lost Ark does. And it didn't need to. It's an action movie. We're all just having fun.
Yeah, right.
But that's there as this extra level. And when somebody asks me, what's it like to discover something in archaeology, I say, go watch Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's got the magic of discovery, that thrill of when you realize I have just seen something that nobody else has seen. I have put the pieces together, in a way that means I'm the first to figure this out. And I'm connected with something that these people were doing thousands of years ago, and now that's connected to me.
Yeah.
And it's this amazing feeling. That's part of what makes archaeology fascinating. And it's in Raiders of the Lost Ark that's best transmitted for the screen.
Yeah.
And I think it's because it comes back to respect. They respected the history. They didn't have to make it bigger or different.
No, right.
They just said, this is how it was. And that's cool. And it didn't have to be exaggerated or made 10 times bigger than it really is. This is how it was. But if you tell a good enough story and have the actors show you how amazing that feels. I mean, I was there in Egypt. There's a real monument where it's aligned with the sun. So that on a certain day, the sun lines up and the sunbeam goes all the way down into the deepest chamber of this huge, giant rock-cut temple. And these, millions of pounds of stone have been arranged to work with the sun. And it's sending a message about we who are in charge of Egypt are in harmony with the whole universe. We have organized everything in our society in harmony with the universe. So you're not going to starve. We're going to make sure everybody's fed. We're going to make sure everybody's safe. Your government is aligned with the whole universe. God is on our side.
Ah.
That was the message.
Yeah.
And when you go there and you see this still operating, it's haunting.
Yeah.
And yet I've never seen a straight nonfiction documentary that tells anybody what that feels like. But I was there, and I can tell you, Raiders tells the truth about that.
Wow, so much. Yeah. Well, and I think, Raiders, it had the adventure, it has everything. And then it has the spiritual, and it and like you said, to be on point and to bring that to us as an audience and to have that respect. I mean, that to me, that story needs to be told. Yeah, those are just this is just awesome. So then, did they keep most of their stuff? I mean, most of their extras and stuff?
A good bit of it. Yeah. And so I had to find the location where they shot the Tanis digs for Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Do you think we'd have any trouble? Or did we? I mean, of course you would be able to find it. We would have no trouble believing that, would we? Holly? Of course you would find that.
Of course.
But they bulldozed that to clean up after themselves. So all of the Egyptian ruins had been bulldozed, but I find one piece, and it's got the head of Anubis carved into it, and it's surreal. I'm an archaeologist who specializes in ancient Rome and ancient Egypt. I've dug in Egypt. I've worked with Rome. And I'm here in Tunisia at the site of a fake archaeological dig, but I'm actually pulling out of the ground a fragment of an Egyptian carving of Anubis that's accurate, but it's fiberglass, it's not stone. And it's from a movie, it's not from ancient history. And it's like, this is just so meta. It's so
right.
Yeah.
But I've got that piece from that site, and the wonderful pieces in the archives. There was this fabulous mummy case, like 7 feet tall. And that was one of the things where I'm looking at, and it's like, it looks like you stole this. This is forgery quality. That came from the British Museum. And I said, so where's this from? And they said, oh, we don't know. But we know it's not one of the Indiana Jones movies because we looked and it's not there in any of the movies. It would have been in Raiders because that's where they went to Egypt, but it's not there. So we don't know where this came from. It's just in the collections. And I thought, And I took a look at Raiders, and the archaeologist spotted it's there. It's in the background. You never see it clearly, but it's there. That's where it's from.
Look at you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, we're not gonna sit on that. We're gonna find out.
Like Bugs Bunny used to say, "Never send a duck to do a rabbit's job."
Love that. So our time. You're gonna have to come back if your schedule allows you. But we're getting close on time. But so the movie that you're thinking, there's so many different directions you're going to that you could go. So you probably have to have a sequel, and therefore.
I hope that happens.
But. So you're going to focus more on let's kind of just, because it's kind of hard to rein all this in. David, this is a packed hour right now.
Oh, yeah. I could listen to you for days.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you, Holly.
So we do need to have you come back on. But what is the focus going to be more so?
This particular documentary is the archaeology of Indiana Jones.
Okay.
Because that story has not been told. and you can't go and find it anywhere. There are bits and pieces, but there's no other archaeologist who was on staff at Skywalker Ranch,
Right.
and there's no other Hollywood people with my knowledge of archaeology.
Right.
I've had this unique perspective on all of this, and I want to share those stories because I can, no matter how many times you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, I can show you more in this movie than you've ever seen. I can help you see it through the eyes of an archaeologist. And so this movie will be maybe an hour and a half long. It'll be broadcast quality.
Okay.
And the only way we can get it made is through Kickstarter, because no studio will do something this original.
Okay.
It's part History Channel facts, it's part Discovery Channel adventure, it's part personal quest, but it's also film history. Well, that's too many different things. A regular studio won't do this.
Okay.
But I've given this as a talk, and people love it.
Sure.
Whether it's a library or for academics, like, you don't have to be an Indiana Jones fan for these stories of how did you find it to be fun, right? So it's appealing to everybody. The finished product will speak for itself, but the only way to get it made is Kickstarter. So Kickstarter right now, it's called Chasing Raiders, like chasing after something, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Chasing Raiders, the archaeology of Indiana Jones. It's on Kickstarter right now through just after Christmas. And we need the community's support or this won't happen. So we can stretch every dollar like George Lucas used to and like he taught me to. And we can make this on a small budget, but we need a minimum of $30,000 to make this happen. And really, we need more like 55. But I'll make it happen if we only get 30. But if you've got an Indiana Jones fan in your life, we've got some great rewards in this for our backers. And these are going to be unique, cool things that you can only get through this campaign. So please come and look at us on Kickstarter, Chasing Raiders, the archaeology of Indiana Jones.
Love this, love this. I'm just like, yeah, but because I'm that person that I want to see the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's, to me, how is the magic done? Who's behind that curtain? You know, I just think that that's just, you know, beyond that, to me is a cool. That's a cool story. Those are cool.
The unsung hero
exactly.
of Raiders is Deborah Fine, the researcher in their archives who gave all of the research to the screenwriter. And nobody can tell Debbie's story except me. So that's what I want people's help to do.
Yeah. Well, I don't see you. I don't see any. I think you'll be hurdling all of those obstacles, David. I think you're going to be. I think whatever you set your mind to, it comes into play. So, so we'll be going to Kickstarter and
Chasing Raiders.
Chasing Raiders. Awesome, awesome. Well, this has been a fun morning for sure, and appreciate your time and your information. There's so many more questions I have. I'm not even.
Great.
Yeah, so we'll have to come back on.
Oh yeah,
definitely. So
I want to be here.
yeah, for sure. So, David West Reynolds, thank you for being a wonderful guest this morning on Coffee Club, and we'll let you get out of here and have a great weekend and keep up the great work. And I can't see what your next adventure. It sounds like it's going to be a dandy. Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much.
Let's thank our sponsors, Holly.
We'd like to thank Meadowview Healthcare, Walmart, Salem Crossing, Hoosier Uplands, Americans for Prosperity, Mama Roses, Fox Lee Wealth Management, Dr. Black's Eye Associates, Dr. Mindy Gunn, Marshall Monuments, and McAllister Lane Consulting. Thank you, sponsors, so much.
All right, everyone, let's have the best Friday ever. Thank you.
Got land? Want cash? Vital Farms is here to help. Become an egg farmer and we'll set you up with our best-in-class support team, teach you egg farming our way, and compensate you fairly for the eggs you produce. Call 844-494-VITAL today to learn how you can transform tree-filled or underutilized land into cash flow for your family. Again, our number is 844-494-VITAL.